Good evening, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our panel, The Strait and Narrow, Securing the Sea Lanes in an Age of Blockade. We often talk about the global economy in terms of digital data, trade agreements, and financial markets, but the stark reality is that 90% of global trade still moves by water. The stability of modern world relies on a handful of maritime choke points. Narrow corridors of water where geopolitics, international law, and global commerce collide on a daily basis. Today, those choke points are under unprecedented strain. From the weaponization of the Strait of Hormuz and the introduction of selective pressure counter blockades to the proliferation of an unregulated shadow fleet bypassing international law, commercial vessels are no longer just collateral damage, they are being treated as geopolitical targets. To unpack this delicate balance between kinetic conflict, economic statecraft, and maritime law, we are joined by three extraordinary leaders who sit at the absolute intersection of these issues. Starting off, it is my honor to introduce His Excellency, Brigadier General Sheikh Nawaf bin Mubarak Thani. He is a global leader with deep roots in defense intelligence operations for the state of Qatar. He currently serves as the president of the Council on International Mediation, bringing an unparalleled perspective on back-channel diplomacy and regional dynamics in the Gulf. Joining us also is David Mortlock. He is an expert on economic statecraft and a partner at Willkie, Farr, and Gallagher. David previously served as the Director for International Economic Affairs at the White House National Security Council, where he managed the intersections of national security, sanctions, and global supply chain resilience. And it is also my honor to introduce Minister Vasilis Kikilias. We are honored to have him as the Minister of Maritime Affairs and Insular Policy for the Hellenic Republic, representing Greece, a nation that controls the largest merchant fleet on the planet. Minister Kikilias stands at the forefront of European, global, and shipping policy amidst today's maritime friction. Let's welcome our panelists. Sheikh Nawaf, let me start with you. You've got deep roots in defense intelligence, international mediation in the Gulf and globally. How is the region viewing the actions of Iran and their control of the Strait of Hormuz and the counter blockade that the U.S. and a couple of its allies are being involved in? Does this put mediation in a strange position, or is this something that could help reinforce free trade through maritime lanes?
Well, first of all, thank you, Justin, for the question. Thank you for the Athens Defense Summit, convening this very important summit and this particular important panel and subject. When it comes to, obviously, freedom of navigation, specifically as it relates to the Strait of Hormuz and the Arabian Gulf, it is a vital matter that doesn't just affect the GCC countries, or in my case, Qatar, but it also affects the global economy. Everything from basic energy, but also products that fuel AI growth, healthcare facilities, and other elements of modern life. The blockade, obviously, by Iran is egregious. It violates international law and norms. We know that. But what comes after that is the question. It cannot stand what Iran is doing right now in the Gulf. The GCC countries, the Europeans, and America stand together in this idea of combating that. The question is how to combat that. And now I am of the understanding and belief of kinetic actions in short war does not have a solution for any political question. And the only way to move forward is to have a political and diplomatic avenue towards any political question. Currently, what we see by Iran is unfortunate, but the United States of America, I think, is taking a good posture, a positive posture, by not advancing the kinetic options and by seeking a diplomatic mediated approach. Qatar has always supported that. The GCC have supported that unanimously amongst them all. And I think what the Pakistanis are doing is very thankful. But I don't see this ending in a way that Iran may want it to end. And I think there must be concessions by the Iranians moving forward. I think that restoring trade and freedom of navigation is the only way that this will end, and the only tool that this will end by effectively is through mediation and diplomacy.
Minister Kikilias, I'd like to bring this to you. You are the minister that oversees the largest commercial vessel fleet in the world. In your backyard, you have the Mediterranean, the Black Sea. We're starting to see stresses put on the maritime transportation system, particularly in the region. How are the shipping interests navigating the current environment of the latest stress points that are coming on? Is this an issue that Greece really needs to take a focus on, and how can they lead the effort to keep free maritime trade moving forward?
Well, these were the words of the Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis. It's more than obvious that we want and we need the Straits to come back to the previous state, and free navigation, and through that, free commerce, because let's all try to understand that 80 to 90% of global commerce is done by sea. So, in terms of energy, this is extremely important. In terms of circulation around the globe of the goods, primary sector, agricultural sector, etc., is extremely important also. But also through the Straits, we have 20% of global oil and 20% of global natural gas and other important commercial goods. So it's more than obvious that it affects the planet. And the longer we have to endure a situation like that, the bigger the problems. Having said that, we have always supported, through the IMO and the law of the sea, free trade. And of course, yes, 5,800 ships, Greek-owned ships. This is the 20% of the global fleet. So we're everywhere around the globe, and unfortunately, we have dealt with enormous problems lately that have to do with instability in the planet in general. A war in the heart of Europe, now we got a war in the Middle East, a pandemic, huge situation of public health once every 100 years. And this is causing energy crisis. Unfortunately, peace and war through the times was made, and now also about water, food, and energy. But we're there, consistent with our allies, trying to convince everybody that safety of our seafarers, first of all, safety of the people in the region, also very, very important. It's incredible what has happened to the region. It's unprecedented, unfortunately. But matters of national security and global security are in order also. We got our European family, we're NATO members, we belong to the Western Alliance, and we're seeking the best possible way for this huge problem to evolve into a solution.
So I want to follow up with you, Minister.
Please.
You mentioned the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. Does it seem ironic to you that two of the signatories who never ratified UNCLOS are Iran and the US, the two parties that are involved with the blockade? Does it seem ironic that they are the two involved in a majority of this tension? And second of all, how important is universal adoption of the UN Convention on the Laws of the Sea? Is it essential for free trade?
Yes, it is essential. I'll be very, very careful in terms of how I discuss matters of external politics. We have a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we have a Minister of Foreign Affairs, and remember, he is the one, and they are the ones sitting at the table of negotiations. So it will be very, very interesting to see that people that comment, right or left, important decisions that are made are not, as far as I'm concerned, 100% they're under the impression that they understand what is happening, but they're not actually there to be able to understand what the negotiations are, what is happening. I'll give you an example. You remember when the war in Ukraine started, everybody thought that President Putin would invade Kiev in 5 days. We're 4.5 years after that, and the war in Ukraine is still on. So I would be very, very careful in terms of, talking about things that are discussed on the table. Reality is, and I'm telling you once more, at the end of the line, we're democracies. We respect freedom. We support our Western alliance, and we understand that a big equation of that is free trade.
Well, let me ask.
And moving our ships, commercial fleet, through the globe with no problems. If problems occur, it's more than evident that it's a geostrategical and geopolitical very important part of the globe, the area within the Persian Gulf and outside that, and the Strait of Hormuz. See how easy it is, unfortunately, to create huge problems that are not going to be solved easily. Let's say, for example, that tomorrow it ended and there was an agreement. I think it would take months for the situation to de-escalate in terms of the prices of energy, the prices of goods, etc., of inflation, etc.
Let me ask it another way. Is the law of the sea an essential part of maintaining that free flow of commerce throughout the globe, with 90% of the commerce going in by sea trade lanes?
No, yes, it is. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about that. But let me move forward one step and explain something else also.
Okay.
The laws and the IMO, and everybody respects that. But listen, what is our fuel? Our fuel is our transition fuel, is LNG. Okay. There was a huge effort to vote, and I'm so happy it got postponed so people can rethink exactly of what the situation is, for natural gas and the LNG to be taxed, heavily taxed, in terms of the IMO from 2027. So it will be taxed 120 billion in 2027 and 100 to 300 billion every year until 2035. This would create huge inflation, extreme energy prices, huge prices in terms of goods, in order to substitute the transitional fuel, which is LNG, with biofuels, which do not actually exist because they are produced in 0.5% of the global needs. So we do not have the next technology. It's not there, but we're willing to tax all our seafarers and all our ships and all our commerce for what I do not understand, and totally destroy governments, societies, the average European family, the average Greek family, the average American family, and so on. Yes, everybody wants a cleaner planet. Yes, everybody wants us to leave a better planet to our children, but the facts are here. The people have to survive and should be able to prosper and live a good life. So decisions that are taken in the European Union, in the IMO, and generally around the globe that have to do with the sea and with fuel, for example, are very, very important and not to be taken lightly.
So, and I know, Minister, I've been told that you have a vote in Parliament that you need to...
That occurred.
Yeah. So
this is everyday politics. What can I say?
Understood. But I would like to stay with you because I would like to get into how much is maritime commerce a national security issue, or how important is free maritime commerce to Greek national security from a state view?
Okay. First of all, global commerce should be led out of war conflicts, out of danger, out of naturally and logically, this should be out of the equation. It's not nowadays, but we have shown resilience. We've shown resilience as seafarers in terms of COVID, and we made it in very, very difficult times. Then again, once more, during multiple crises, my deepest concern is security of the people that we have in the ships and the people that travel as seafarers. But in terms of resilience, I would have to say that the Greek ship owners and the Greek shipping industry has made it. There's huge experience, there's great expertise, there's big cooperation with other countries and with shipyards, with technology, with people that are in charge of the industry. And, some people feel that this is something out of community, out of society, and out of everyday life. On the contrary, it's more than obvious now. The more the problems there are, the bigger the price the everyday family has to pay. So, through my position, I'm responsible for that. I see resilience, but I see also issues and problems in terms of everyday life. And let's face it, as far as a politician is concerned, this is the first and most important thing for us to be able to provide a better life. These multiple crises, unfortunately, cause serious problems.
Absolutely. David, let me go to you. Your job in the White House, you obviously were at the crossroads of where economics, national security, and the economy kind of come together. In that role, as you see those 3 points converging when it comes to these maritime choke points, is this something that the world needs to take particular attention to? Are we setting a groundwork for the use of free trade, economic security as a weapon? Or is it essential that everybody says, look, that's now off limits, we are going to have to take a look at maintaining free trade without it being weaponized, as we're seeing in places like the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, Justin, the minister just noted that trade should not be a tool to bear in disputes. But the reality is the United States has been doing that for hundreds of years now, going back to trade embargoes at the turn of the 19th century. Obviously, we've had the Cuba embargo in place for over 50 years now, and we use sanctions on a daily basis at this point to achieve U.S. foreign policy goals. I think what has changed in the last few weeks is that some of these tools have now been used against us in a fairly effective way. Not necessarily in achieving leverage, but certainly in terms of imposing economic harm. When we put together sanctions tools, when the current administration puts together sanctions tools, one golden rule is that you want the impact to be asymmetrical. And the interconnectedness of the global economy makes that possible. And the dominance of the US financial system makes it possible for the United States to do that in a way that can have a much greater negative economic impact on a sanctions target than it does on the United States. I think what we are seeing now is that Iran is willing to, whether asymmetric or not, it's willing to visit economic harm on the global trade system, which has that negative impact on the United States. Now, as I said, it's yet to be seen whether that's going to create the leverage to get the United States to end the bombing campaign. President Trump says it will not, and he is not concerned about the economic impact of the closing the strait on Americans. But I suspect it certainly is in the back of his mind and the back of the mind of many of his advisors. So I think it's something that the United States is no longer just playing offense on, we're also playing defense.
Interesting. General Thani, when we look at the traditional naval deterrences, when we hear the comments of the minister and David, we see asymmetric threats and diplomacy stalls. The use of kinetic action, we see the importance of back channel to stave off disasters. How important is these back channel discussions, these back channel diplomatic efforts in trying to keep these choke points from being weaponized, from becoming tools of war?
Well, traditionally they have been successful, but unfortunately we're in a new era where these tools in this crisis in the Arabian Gulf has not been or have not been successful. His Excellency mentioned, the preference of we prefer not to enter into any conflict, and free trade is good for everyone, and I agree with him. But when you talk about the Gulf, for instance, in this specific case, it's not only what's above the surface when it comes to ships, it's also below the surface when it comes to communications and internet cables that transport data for commerce and banking in cities like Dubai and connect those with global markets. And those are being threatened today as well. And looking at, Qatar has the largest active LNG fleet in the world. But diversifying LNG is never going to be an option if you can't have a fleet that could safely sail the waters. I mean, just during this crisis, Qatar Energy, through its investment in the United States, launched, as an example, Golden Pass LNG. This will be, in the next couple of years, the third largest exporter of American liquid natural gas, Qatari. That's American gas, but it's an open, a free trade and open economy, and that allows that. But those ships that now sail out of Texas in the Gulf of Mexico, or Gulf of America, however you want to say it, are those same fleet that can't leave the Arabian Gulf. So that is an issue. The problem, obviously, for countries like Qatar, like Kuwait, like Saudi Arabia to a certain extent, because while they have access to the Red Sea, it's also limited in capacity, and the United Arab Emirates, is it's not only direct fuel. Today, Qatar is the world's largest exporter of helium, a main component in the chipsets that fuel AI. The investment in the United States, where you're from, Justin, and David, you know more than me. With the CHIPS Act, the independence of the U.S. Or the attempt of independence of the U.S. from chips made in Asia, and I'm sure you're going to touch on Taiwan in a bit, is also important because that's being stalled. MRI machines that need helium, that's going to send hospitals all over the world into waiting lists for months and months more than they are today. So the secondary and tertiary effects of this, and this is a test bed for what could happen in the future. If what happens in the Gulf today is considered precedence that isn't combated, and it shouldn't be combated kinetically, but through diplomacy, law, and for the whole world, and I know that the Gulf states and Europe are working on maritime constructs to deal with the specific issue, and hopefully it will see the light of day in the future. And me, unlike His Excellency, have the benefit of not being in government, so I probably can say that. But that is something that we want to see, hopefully, working with. Greece is a great partner of the Gulf. It is a strong partner economically. It is a reliable partner, and we look to Greece and the rest of the Europeans to work together in bringing this opportunity for more trade and less war forward. But again, that precedent is a dangerous one.
Well, I want to go back to a couple of points that both Sheikh, you brought up, and Minister. I'd like to bring this to you, Minister. We talked about the cabling. You know, we've got the importance of the cabling going into the UAE for economic stability and security. You mentioned that, you know, you've got such a great maritime presence. Underwater cabling is, I'm sure, an essential part of economic and national security here. Is that an unseen threat that we're seeing with the Russian interaction up in the North Sea? Is that something that we're going to start seeing more globally, where we're seeing the underwater threat becoming more prevalent? Is that something you're dealing with here in Greece?
Well, unfortunately, a war is a bad thing. So many times anything goes. And this is a clear threat, which means that you got to visualize and look ahead and see the new capabilities in terms of internal and external security. Maybe, okay, I'm now in the fields of the Ministry of Defense, but okay, just for 2 minutes, and then you will excuse me, I'll go to Parliament.
Yeah.
So, maybe it's underwater unmanned submarines. Maybe it's drones. Maybe it's surface boats unmanned also, because we're talking about hundreds of thousands of miles of the sea. It's not just the Aegean Sea in front of Greece, now it's the Mediterranean Sea, it's the North Sea. There's no stop to that. So what the effort is for, for new technology to be able to serve everyday life, and unfortunately situations like that. So we have to adjust and be compatible to what is coming around the corner, Excellency, in the future. So this is an effort that we're doing to upgrade our investments in terms of our national security and internal security also, and of course working together with our partners and friends. It's making it easier rather than more difficult. But the challenges are a lot. The challenges are a lot. We did find, unfortunately, a few days ago, an unmanned sea vessel with a lot of explosives inside in the Ionian Sea, on the other side of the Aegean Sea, between us and Italy. And there were all the actions taken by the Ministry of Defense, but also from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs towards the people or the countries that we think is responsible for that. But it's important, and it's critical. It's critical because you got all these things that have to do with war or war affairs around you, but then you got cruise ships, you got ferry boats, you got yachts, you got everyday people. We are a country that is based on tourism. It's a big part of shipping and tourism. It's a big part of our GDP. We wouldn't want to see something like that. So there's always a danger in terms of this kind of instability and what war is bringing to people. So this is the situation. We have to adjust, we have to adapt, we have to be resilient. I told you what our prioritization is. First of all, the value of human life, and then after that, we'll take it as it goes. It's not going to be easy. There is no prediction. Nobody can predict. Ask the gentleman there, His Excellency. He has a lot of experience also. He will tell you in situations like that, you cannot predict what's going to happen tomorrow rather than predict what's going to happen in a month.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well,
So you will excuse me now.
Minister, we appreciate it. Parliament calls.
Very much for
Thank you
taking
so
time with
much
me.
for your
Thank you.
time,
Thank you very
Minister.
much. Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let me go, David. That's going to be a good segue to you. Is we're seeing all the challenges of how maritime, even sanctions. We're seeing the shadow fleet becoming an economic and strategic issue globally, but particularly in this conflict. Are we seeing a change in the way that the maritime domain is being used as an economic and national security tool? And are the shadow fleets, and are they a threat to that security and stability?
Yeah, I absolutely think that maritime has been at the center of sanctions policy and sanctions enforcement for many years now, not just in the last 4 or 5 years where the Russia sanctions have dramatically expanded. We saw it in Iran in the 2010s, where Iran was smuggling oil to places like China. Despite the U.S. secondary sanctions and multilateral efforts to get Iranian oil off the market. I think what we have seen recently, absolutely, is the use of a shadow fleet by Iran, by Russia, to move their oil to blunt the impact of sanctions. However, I don't think it's quite the nefarious threat that the term shadow fleet implies. Right? The shadow fleet is probably the greatest threat from the shadow fleet is an environmental disaster. Right? The shadow fleet is rickety, it is old, it is poorly insured, and so you could argue that the fact that we have called these vessels a shadow fleet is an indication that the sanctions are working. Right? Iran does not have access to the global insurance market. Russia, the G7 oil cap on Russia has forced Russia to use vessels outside of the G7, outside of G7 insurance, to ship oil to places like China and India that will buy it above the price cap. And the reality is the use of these vessels, even in the situation of Russia, is pushing the cost of those shipments and therefore the profit to Russia, it's pushing it down. And so arguably, it's something, depending on various estimates, I've seen between $20, even $50 a barrel premium that the Russians are losing because they don't have access to these G7 services. And so I think, obviously the UK in particular, the US with respect to Iran has been using sanctions to target this shadow fleet. My personal opinion is I think that is a little bit of a distraction because the much more important policy is pushing Iran and now Russia outside of these economical channels where they can get shipping services, get insurance services that maximize their profit. And that is now off the table for them.
Well, let me follow up on that. Because we're talking about the Strait of Hormuz here right now, but this could easily be the Strait of Malacca. This could obviously be the Red Sea. I even heard somebody the other day saying, what if Russia were to block the Bering Strait off of Alaska? Does the shadow fleet tie into the threat of using maritime transportation as a weapon in those situations?
I mean, to some degree, right? Look, the shadow fleet is certainly a tool to blunt the impact of sanctions, as I said, right? It diminishes the impact of sanctions because Iran has somewhere to turn to ship its oil, right? Russia has somewhere to turn to sell its oil above the price cap. But these are not particularly viable options. They're not long-term options. They're not profitable options. Personally, I think the greater threat to those examples you mentioned is the collapse of a rules-based international system, right? Something that the United States has led for 70 years. And the freedom of navigation has been one of those principles that the United States has had great success having the world accept and adopt. and using the tools at its disposal, along with its allies, like Greece, like Europe, to ensure that we maintain that freedom of navigation. And I think once we start, whether it's Iran, whether it's certain suggestions, I think from individuals in our own country, in the United States, where we start suggesting that control of these waterways, imposing tolls on the use of these waterways, is an acceptable practice, absolutely, I think it means Russia is more likely to adopt it. And so that is certainly a direction I fear is going down.
But Sheikh Nawaf, from a diplomatic standpoint, you know, the back and forth of Iran is going to collect tolls, make money to further support its weapons buildup, its ability to continue on the conflict. The reality is there a diplomatic solution? Is a diplomatic solution the only solution as an off-ramp from this? And does this set the model for future conflicts, such as if China gets involved in Taiwan, we talk about the South China Sea and the Strait of Malacca?
Well, unfortunately, no, Justin, it's not the only solution, and that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid the alternative, which is further kinetic options and war. But that also has an issue of looking at the reasoning behind why there isn't another option. Because sustained control of the straits means sustained high energy prices for the global market. And we hear stories from the United States, for instance, that, well, you know, the Arab Gulf oil is over there and our oil is over here, but that's obviously not accurate. This is a global market, and America is still a capitalist nation, which means the central government, the federal government, cannot control what oil companies, who they sell to. And once they enter into the global market, well, then that affects domestic prices to a greater extent. And that will have, again, secondary and tertiary effects in Europe, in Asia. Well, it's already having that. But sustained blockage means sustained effects. And His Excellency the Minister, just a few minutes ago, mentioned this thing doesn't turn around, you know, just because a blockade ends. This will have a lag time of anything between, you know, 6 months and 24 months until recovery catches up to the effects of ending a blockade. And then that will have the unique effect of setting a precedent. When we look at, you know, the Strait of Malacca, it's not the same effect as the Strait of Hormuz when it comes to global energy, obviously, but it has its effect when it comes to having great power competition being challenged directly. This doesn't do it in the Arabian Gulf, but it would have that effect on great power competition in the Strait of Malacca. And obviously, having that tolerance of illegal behavior will have its own toll when we have rogue nations deciding to take the law and norms into their own hands.
So, but to that point, now, David, I mean, based off of Sheikh Nawaf's comments, we're getting into looking into a crystal ball. If you were to look from your experience of being the sanctions czar, I like calling you that, it's just so much easier.
It's accurate.
It is accurate. From being the sanctions czar on the National Security Council, your days with State Department, your days with the Department of Treasury, when we see this, is it now becoming an either or, the sanctions versus blockades and control and tolls? Are we going to see them butting heads and creating a large-scale security or economic crisis down the road?
Well, I think we've already seen them butting heads, right? The United States and Israel bomb Iran, and then the United States authorizes me and you to buy Iranian oil, putting billions of dollars in the Iranians' pockets. Right? I mean, those two things are just not consistent. But the US government was forced into that decision because of rising oil prices as a result of the conflict. We've ultimately what happened is that OFAC at the Treasury Department issued licenses allowing Iran to sell their oil to US persons. It issued licenses and continues to issue licenses allowing Russia to sell its oil above the price cap, including to US persons. And that means that sanctions are no longer trying to achieve foreign policy goals. They are trying to compensate for the consequences of kinetic action.
Let me jump in on that, because by turning on and off the sanctions, does that take away the threat and make it so the sanctions won't be effective in maintaining free shipping, free trade, maritime security? Kinetic action and direct deployment of kinetic forces are going to enforce that. We basically turn the entire maritime transportation system into a tool for battle instead of using sanctions?
I mean, look, one thing I think policymakers hate to hear is that sanctions and other tools of economic statecraft are not kinetic. They will not have immediate consequences, right? And they are building. They tend to be slow in terms of building pressure on their target, particularly when you are trying to create leverage to achieve a diplomatic solution, right? They are not the same as dropping a bomb and having that immediate kinetic effect. And so the reality is right now, the sanctions are not working together with our kinetic action, right? We can have, well, we've had an embargo of Iran for decades, right? And the pressure built up slowly and effectively, right? Especially, post 2010, when the Obama administration really, again, working with the EU and other allies, really pushed to isolate Iran and eliminate its oil sales. That is not going to happen. It is not going to produce results on the same timeline as a resolution for the current crisis.
So, from your aspect as the president of the Council on International Mediation, does that minimize diplomatic efforts to try and avoid situations that we're seeing now?
I don't think it minimizes effort. I think we've been working in Qatar for decades now in mediation, effectively everywhere from Kabul to Caracas, and most points in between where there's a conflict, including Ukraine and Russia. I mean, uniting families, children, from Russia to Ukraine multiple times as a Qatari effort, effectively. I think the biggest challenge was the challenge in our own backyard, it turns out. And so this is a very volatile conflict. That is where the difference, is prevalent. Just give you an example, and most of you here are very familiar with the war in Ukraine. It's in your backyard. Some of you are more familiar than others. But just imagine this. There were more ballistic missiles in 4 days thrown over us, shot to us in the GCC, than Ukraine in the whole 4 years. 4 days. Something's going to give. There have been more, by the time this conflict ends, there will be more drones thrown at us. We've had jets fly with bombs trying to attack us. I mean, and cruise missiles and all, but those numbers are huge and unsustainable without action. And if action through mediation, which is what Qatar's pushing for, what I, through my organization, tries to push for, does not have an effect, then attack, unfortunately, the attacks through kinetic action will be the only alternative option, something that no one wants, that we push against every day. But I don't think this unsustainable situation, whether the global economy, whether global security, or whether regional political powers will look at as something that we could live with, because we can't.
David, you agree?
If I can add to that, I do agree. But to reference a question you asked earlier, I do think that the only solution, short of unconditional surrender by Iran, is a diplomatic solution, right? And I don't think that the United States is going to have boots on the ground in Iran anytime soon. For what that prediction is worth. But I think, look, anytime we've had success with an adversary over the last few years, it's been with a diplomatic solution. And we were able to use economic pressure and diplomacy to get to Iran to the negotiating table, but ultimately what eliminated Iran's weapons program previously, nuclear weapons program, was a negotiated deal, was diplomacy.
But let me go one step further. This is something we've never seen before. I think everybody in the world underestimated Iran's ability to control, particularly with the size of their military and their abilities, to control the Strait of Hormuz the way they have.
So I'm going to disagree with that.
Why?
Because there's a reason we haven't attacked Iran like this in the past. Every prediction I ever heard from any Iran expert, including those I worked with, was that the first thing that would happen for a full-scale attack on Iran is that they would close the Strait of Hormuz. And so, look, I was not in the room with the president and his advisors when they made this decision, but unless they have, those Iran experts have radically changed their views, I would expect that was part of the conversation. It certainly has been in the past.
Nawaf?
Oh, I agree 100%. U.S. CENTCOM and the Joint Staff in the DOW now, have been gaming this for decades. It's not a surprise. I think not having a plan, I think the Iranians viewed that the United States will have a long-term plan beyond kinetic action. I think the only way forward, obviously, and I don't want to repeat what I said, is a peaceful resolution. But it takes two to tango, and the Iranians haven't been willing to. I think that the current administration, I know, David, you and I may agree with everything they've done, but I think at least in this conflict, we can agree that they haven't rushed after they have in the beginning, rushed again to restart the war. Now, it may start. I am with you. I don't see this becoming a broad military option. But it's also, like His Excellency the Minister said earlier, it's very difficult to predict these things. And I would hate for anyone to run back this tape from the conference a few weeks from now, and the Americans and the Iranians are back at kinetic option, which is, unfortunately, while it is unlikely, still a possibility.
But we talk about the Iranian involvement in the Strait of Hormuz. We know that Iran has been interacting with the BRICS alliance quite a bit. David, is there a possibility that we see adversaries to the United States, such as Iran, China, Russia? Is it a threat to free trade and economic security that they come together and say, we're not only going to do the Strait of Hormuz, collect tolls, block that for our control, but do it as a unified alliance, saying we're going to get the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Malacca, the Bering Strait, and really control global security and the global economics?
Well, look, I think we're living in a very different world than we were 10 years ago when the JCPOA was in effect. Keep in mind that JCPOA was not an agreement between the United States and Iran. It was an agreement between the United States, Iran, the EU, China, and Russia. All of those countries, and the EU came together to multilaterally put pressure on Iran, get them to the table, and then negotiate the deal, right? What is not happening today is those groups of countries, those allies, working together to find a resolution, a joint resolution, a mutually acceptable resolution to this crisis. And so, I think unfortunately, again, if I can make a prediction, I think the United States is going to find it difficult to, and maybe not even want to take that role as the leader of a rules-based system, and to encourage, if not compel, countries like Russia and China to go along with a system that benefits us all equally.
Well, if I may add,
Yeah.
there's also a secondary effect that not a lot of people noticed when the American Navy or U.S. CENTCOM naval component blockaded the Iranian ports. That just also happened and it served, which is the fact that very close and strong, long-lasting allies of the United States, like India, like Japan, did not look for the first time in its history, in its relationship with the United States and its navigation of the waters of the Gulf for energy. They didn't look to the United States when it looked to get its oil from the Gulf. It contacted Iran directly. The Indians said, we need to contact Iran and get permission for them to get our oil because we're suffering. The Japanese, the same thing. And this is a vulnerability for the United States from a political perspective. When its closest allies disregard the presence of the United States and decides to go to Iran. So blockading the Iranian ports ended that, and in a sense put a lot of its oldest allies in the world back, if I would say, in line with coordination with the U.S. instead of coordination with Iran. And I truly believe that the U.S. government saw that as a threat to its global effect beyond the Gulf when India, a partner, when Japan, a partner and an ally, knowing that the United States doesn't want them to deal with Iran, did that anyway. So that was a secondary effect that happened and ended when the U.S. Navy blockaded Iranian ports.
We've got about 7 minutes left, and crystal ball. Does what we're seeing today in the current state, is this going to put pressure on the individual maritime power states, including Greece, to put a new focus on maritime security and the free trade of, or the free flow of commerce through shipping lanes? Are we going to see a more focused, through technology, through policy, or are we going to see it possibly diplomatically? Are we going to see more countries start doing either alliances or bilateral agreements for the continuing free trade through shipping lanes? David, I'll start with you, and I'll close out with General Thani.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be a difficult issue for years to come. Look, the United States has historically been a leader on free trade, certainly in recent history. That has included, as Thomas Friedman said, the world is flat, right? But I think, some political interests in the United States don't think that should be the case. And so I think we've obviously seen that with the tariffs program. And we've seen that with proposals to partner with other countries, including Iran, to impose tolls on waterways. I would like to see a return to, as I said, the freedom of navigation as a core principle of a rules-based system. And we have seen speeches from other leaders, the Gulf, Canada, Europe, that taking the lead on securing those principles. And if a good thing comes out of this crisis in Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, I think it is going to be the realization that we need to protect that ideal and that principle to ensure that we're not living with a knife to our throats from any country that can shut down one of these critical waterways.
Sheikh Thani, in the words of Lawrence O'Donnell, the last word is yours.
Well, thank you for that, Lawrence. First of all, I think Thomas, Friedman should do the world is upside down at this point instead of the world is flat. I think there's also, and I agree with everything what David said, but I think there's also another thing that's happening in 2026. The idea of alliances are being reevaluated. The long-standing view of allies, interdependency, interoperability are being reevaluated. Doesn't mean it'll change. I mean, for instance, the GCC and Qatar, the United States is a vital and long-lasting ally. But reevaluated. You see that within NATO, within Europe specifically, more than NATO, and I mean the EU, looking at, and I've had, without going into details, I've had discussions with EU officials that have touched on the issue of reevaluating what does alliances mean for the EU vis-a-vis NATO, because a majority of them are in both. But it goes beyond that. In Africa, in the Middle East, and in Asia, I think you'll see a reevaluation of what it means to be an ally, what alliances mean, and maybe in some cases, even a slight shift, which could be quite a change. It could be a crisis, it could be an opportunity, and not to sound too philosophically Chinese about it, it is going to be interesting.
Very good. For those of you who were expecting to see Admiral Doug Fears apologizes for not being here. He was stuck because of aircraft equipment delay and was stuck in Toronto and is not able to make it. He does send his regards. On behalf of the Council of International Mediation, we'd like to thank the Athens Defense Summit and the organizers for organizing this incredible panel and this incredible conference. I'd also like to thank Minister Kikilias, David Mortlock, His Excellency Sheikh Brigadier General Nawaf Thani, and thank you for your all's participation. We appreciate it. Safe travels to all.
Thank you.